Welcome to the Mutual Success Podcast, where we hear how entrepreneurs and extraordinary sales professionals are helping each other, their clients, their communities, and maybe even saving the world. I am super stoked today to bring you the story of Adam Robbins, Senior Sales Manager for Suntsu, a major importer and distributor of components for America's computing, power, and communications industries. We will hear how this young surf local from Zuma dropped into an entry-level warehouse job, then became an electronics products salesman and entrepreneur, facing challenges like the dot-com crash, global financial crisis, COVID, and some of the ill-advised tariff programs that ended up squeezing profitability of some of America's best companies. I know you'll enjoy listening to him as much as I enjoy talking to Adam. So let's hear how he keeps America's lights on and our computers connected. So first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to this podcast. You are a busy man.
No, my pleasure. You look like you could be my younger, more handsome little brother.
Well, I am. I'm going to be turning 57 this year. What's your birthday?
I was 60 in June. So yeah, you could be my little brother.
So when I looked at I was doing my, modest amount of research because we had a short period of time, but, obviously you've got so many products that, now I know why you don't have any hair. It's similar to my situation. So many products, so many customers, so many ways. And, but I want to thank you for some of the beautiful products that I myself have used. Suntsu Electronics. I've used Amphenol, many Amphenol stuff, but I lived on a boat for 5 years, so I used tons of Marinco stuff.
Yeah, nice.
So are you exclusive distributor for these outfits, or you have
Not exclusive, no. We're one of many.
Okay. So that means you have to hustle. You have to compete, with the same product. So that's a really, really tough business.
Yeah. The key is to put them on the map where they're not, and they keep you as a distributor. You
mentioned something about tariffs. So since that was the first thing on your mind, before we even get into background and how you chose to get into such a challenging profession. Talk a little bit about the tariffs, how it's been, how it is now, and what you think is going to happen next, and how, most importantly, how you're reacting to it.
Well, we've gotten used to it. Customers have gotten used to it. It was really hard to swallow in the beginning. And for those of us who weren't really that familiar with this tariff war, it was presented to us like, we're going to punish the Chinese. But what they were doing was charging us here in America for buying from China. And I've been in this business 40 years. Components, for the most part, back in the 70s and 80s, some components were manufactured in the United States, mostly for military or aerospace. But for the most part, components have always come from, it used to be made in Japan. And then Taiwan came, and their quality became pretty dependable. And then in the last 20 years, China has basically come into play. And because of essentially their slave labor, their prices were so incredibly low, but they were getting their quality up like what we were getting out of Taiwan and Japan. So as we were importing these items, that our customers who are using them and building their products in the United States, we're getting charged 25%, and we had to charge our customers a portion of that tariff. And
which means you were eating some of it too while you were at it.
Yeah, you try to make it a little easier, especially for, good customers, because they have a choice. But what we were doing is basically, China wasn't getting penalized. We're paying the tariff, and we're penalizing our U.S. manufacturers here.
Right.
Now, if you have if you're selling the parts to a manufacturer outside the United States, that tariff kind of gets washed away.
Right.
But if the manufacturing is, if you're shipping it anywhere in U.S. soil, then that tariff is in place. So it's we've gotten used to it, but it's 25%. That's a big chunk.
It is. And when it comes to the world that you operate in, like you said, there's multiple competitors out there, often selling the same stuff that you're selling. So it can, you take whatever skin in the game there is and slice it in half, and it gets a little thin.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say is, the key is to have aggressive pricing from your sources in China. We don't import everything from China, by the way. It's probably, I would say 35%. Everything else comes out of Taiwan, South Korea, maybe a little bit of Vietnam. But if you can get a low enough cost, you could typically amortize that tariff charge into it, and it's painless for the customer.
Right. By the way, how many new chip and electronic manufacturing plants have arisen because of this tariff making it more expensive from China? Any that you're aware of?
How many? I'm sorry. How many?
I'm asking. What the intention from the headline of we're going to punish China because they've taken all our manufacturing. Right. That was the big headline that sold these tariffs.
Right.
Have any new, let's say, component manufacturers picked up the slack and said, we're going to now make this in the US, things that were made in China, and we're going to take over?
Not that I deal with. I'm sure there are. Ironically, a lot of Taiwanese and a lot of other companies have factories in China. So
Right.
what they did was they could be a Taiwanese company that have factories in China, in Taiwan, in Vietnam, in India. They just, I know some of ours moved some of that manufacturing out of China and put it in their Vietnamese plant or their Taiwanese plant. It's just very inexpensive in China because of their labor rates are extremely, extremely low.
Right. Well, there's hopefully going to be a little bit more scrutiny on really what gets to the bottom of the improvement and let's say efficiency of American manufacturing, because I think when you take a hammer to something, you normally break things, you don't fix things, and that's what I always considered that tariff to be. Let's get back to the beginning. How did you get into the business, and what was the attraction?
So I'm going to go way back to the beginning. I was raised by a single mom who, when she divorced her second husband, my stepfather at the time, I was about 8 or 9, I think. She had to go to work for the first time, basically in years. She was at home making babies and being a housewife. So to keep the roof over our head, she had to go to work. And I think it was a neighbor that got her into her first electronic exposure to the electronic world, component world. And she became one of the pioneers, really. It was a good old boys club.
Right.
But before she got into sales, she was in a high level purchasing position for a power supply company out of Camarillo, California. And at the time, I was probably 19 or 20. All I cared about was surfing, women, and weed. And it was pretty much waves, weed, and women in that order. I had hair down to here. I was what they call spicoli, back then. I got through high school, but I wanted to surf, and I worked as just enough to get by on my own. And she begged me to go on an interview. One of her vendors, she said, "Hey, would you interview my son? I need to get him out of the gas station and get him a real job." And of course, they wanted to do more business with her, so they agreed. Yeah, of course, we'll interview Adam. We have a position in the warehouse. And so I promised I would go, and I set up the interview. Or they set it up with me, and I missed it, the first one. There was a good swell, and I didn't think about anything else but surfing. So
And you were
later,
in Camarillo. What break were you surfing?
oh,
No,
at the
I'm
time
asking.
I was a Zuma local. In fact, my nickname was Zuma Zam or Zammers or Zam. I was what they call the Kahuna of Zuma.
Okay.
And so I missed that interview. They called me and said, we'd like to meet you. They want to keep my mom happy, so she would keep buying from them. So can we set up a new time? And I said, sure. And I completely spaced on it, and I missed it.
The second one.
So they gave me a third try, and I promised my mom, no, this time I'll go. I promise, Mom. I won't smoke any pot, and I won't go to the beach. And I went on that interview, and about 2 weeks after that interview, they called me up and said they would like to hire me. And this is 1983. And I said, "Oh wow, this is an 8 to 5 job, like it's Monday through Friday." Okay, yeah. Well, I said, "How much is it going to pay?" And I think it was something like in 1983, it came out to like $22,000 a year. And I said, "You got to be
Not bad.
kidding, you know?" So I started, and I worked in the warehouse for I think it was like less than 2, 3 months, getting to know all the parts, and I was intrigued by it. I was like, I recognize all these components that I used to see in my transistor radio or my
Mm-hmm.
CD, and I'm like, oh wow, I know these parts. And they decided to put me on the phone and see what if I would be good at sales. And that was one thing I was really good at. When kids were setting up lemonade stands, I was setting up stands, but I would go in the backyard and find rocks, and I'd paint them all different colors, and I would sell rocks while the other kids were selling lemonade, and I would make in the 70s, 10, 15, $20. uh,
Wow.
I sold other things too I won't get into, but I was really good at it. So anyway, I took to it, and I soon became this company's top salesperson. I was there 14 years, and that's basically how that started. I was there from 83 to 97. And the main reason why I left them was it was a family company, and I had the wrong last name.
Right.
And when you start making more money than family members, they figure out creative ways to cut your pay while you're keeping the
Right.
roof over their heads.
Yep.
It was time for me to spread my wings and fly.
Awesome. So now talk about that for a second. How was the transition to going out of the nest that nurtured you after you hit the blood ceiling?
It was a little scary because when I started, I was 20 years old, and I didn't have many responsibilities. And then by the time I left in 97, I was married. I already had 2 kids. I bought my first house, and it definitely was a new adventure for me. But the guy that I worked for, he and I, we melded really well, and I helped take his company from. He was not quite a startup, but they were pretty new in the industry, and within 2 years, we went from 2 million to 18 million.
What was the nature of the company? What did they do?
Same exact thing, basically. But what I did is I took what they were doing, which was focusing on a certain technology called surface mount technology, which was still relatively new. Surface mount, I don't know if you're familiar with surface mount.
Is that where you have a printed circuit board and you have all of the etched photo, let's say silver that's left on, and then you solder in the different components on it?
More or less. So surface mount means there's no leads that go through the board that they solder on the bottom,
Okay.
or the top. Surface mount, everything is it's a flat board with the traces, and a machine plants
Right.
them. And today
Right.
it's like 100 components per second or something like that. But my background was more in the interconnect electromechanic. In other words, connectors and switches and potentiometers and stuff like that. 97 to 2007.
Right.
And in 2007, everything started to change. The dot-com bubble and the real estate thing, and things were going down. And I worked for a guy I became really close with, but unfortunately, he lived a lifestyle he didn't want to give up while the company was starting to turn to powder. So I jumped ship and did a brief stint at a competitor who was just bought, but they needed somebody like me because they weren't familiar with what's called franchise distribution. And that didn't work out. But while I was there, I bought a domain name because I said the only way to make things work is to start my own company. And in 2000, about the end of 2008, myself and somebody that I knew through my daughters, who was in the same industry, we decided to let's do it together. His background was independent distribution, which is a little different than what I was doing, which is called franchise distribution. Independent distribution is basically brokers. They're trying to find parts from wherever they can get it. In my line of work, I'm working directly with factories who are providing me the parts.
And you keep in inventory. These
Right.
guys might not keep as much inventory. They have a supplier, and then they'll find a guy who needs it, and then make the deal.
Their thing was book, ship.
Right.
And my line of business was more build your backlog.
Right.
And grow that. But the only way to salvage what I had started was I contacted somebody that I knew that was a young guy who I work for today. And he was set up to get into distribution. He had all the infrastructure and he had all the resources, but he didn't have my knowledge, my vendor base, my customer base. So I went to work with him in 2012 and been with him since 2012. And this is where I'll retire eventually when I decide I'm no longer going to stay in the business. So in reality, I've only had like 1, 2, 3.5, 4 professional jobs in my professional career since 20 years old.
And each one was really impactful. Each one you sent them to the moon after joining them.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the process and the path of building up what you have now, and why do you feel so comfortable there?
What's funny is, so when I've been in the business 40 years, when I came to Suntsu 12 years ago, I was what you call a seasoned veteran. I've been doing this forever. I could walk into just about any place and they knew my name, and I could, say, hey, look, I'm looking for a job, and I wouldn't need to fill out a resume. So I thought I knew everything there was to know about my business and sales. And I soon learned how wrong I was. The gentleman that hired me, he's very smart, and he read a ton of books and followed a lot of successful companies and people in general. And we would actually, he would have me read these books and he would test us on it. And we butted heads. I'm like, dude, I'm going through a divorce right now. I have ADD. I could read this book, but none of it's going to retain. And I was about ready to walk out after the first 3 months because this is like, what are you going to teach me? And he knew that that discussion that we had, he felt it was uncalled for on his part. And he apologized sincerely to me. And he said, look, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. These books and this information I have is really important to me. Give it a shot. Just give it a shot. Do your best. I know you're going to be fantastic, and we're going to take this company to, levels that we've never seen. And, he was really sincere. And I said, Casey, I'm going to do that. And I read these books and I read them over and over and over. And I did what I had to do.
Well, what did you learn from the books?
You can't sell anything to anybody. Time is money. And part of my success was in relationship building. People had choices. And I think because they liked me and they could count on me, they would buy from me, when they had other people, banging on their doors. But I realized the nice guys and gals that were buying from me that were doing maybe 5-10 grand a year were taking up the same amount of time as the customers who were doing 100 grand, 200 grand a year. And I had to cut bait, and I had to hand these people down to some of the junior salespeople to, see if they could build them. But a lot of these customers I dealt with for so long, I go, this is as far as they're going anyways. And I would still keep in touch, and I would help out, especially the junior salespeople who didn't know the account like I did. There's different zones you need to get into in sales. And I've always approached it where, you got to be an expert on your product. You have to. You just can't be an order taker, because you're dealing with engineers and you're dealing with decision makers who, if you can't talk shop with them to some extent, and I have no engineering background, but I could talk to any engineer and send him a link while I'm talking to him on what I think he may be looking for or what I think he may be interested in. But you also have to know your customer and the industry they're in and the type of products that you need to talk to them about. Otherwise, you're just an order taker and you're just hoping for stuff to fall into your lap. So I've always kind of treated my approach to business as a rep versus a distributor, where a rep is more, they rep just a few selective lines and they become technical experts on those lines. They're not stocking, they're just getting orders either through their distributors like myself or direct with the larger customers. And that way I learned a long time ago when I had hair, you got to talk to the people who are designing these products. So they'll design you in on the ground floor.
What you've been able to do is really make better use of the precious time that we have away from, surfing or whatever it is that we really love to do. Although, in if you're doing it right, this job of sales can be so rewarding, right?
It's been really good to me. And I've been really fortunate because for the most part, I'm uneducated as far as, extended education. College just wasn't my thing. And back then you can get away with it. Today, I don't think you can.
Right.
But they weren't teaching what I knew in college. Now, what I should have done is take business courses, because when I started this company that I was basically acquired, I really didn't know how to run a business. I knew how to bring what you need to be successful in the business. But if I would have known, I maybe could have continued to do this on my own. But I'm better off. I don't need to worry about running a business. I just need to worry about building a book of business and helping my salespeople underneath me.
Yeah, it's called creating and cultivating relationships, starting with, your customer, and then building it out to, the customers, the other people in the customers' circles. And then in your case, since you're, running a significant group, cultivating them and helping them maintain their relationships, which is, it's a constant learning, which is, really comes through in everything you've said.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what the acquisition process, because that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs, it can be daunting. There's major pitfalls. There's highwaymen and wolves and sheep's clothing every step of the way. Tell me about that process and how did that work out for you?
Well, this person that ended up acquiring the company, I had met before through somebody mutual with my quasi partner and myself. And I contacted that person who actually introduced me to Casey. And I said, look, my company, which I named Trinity at the time, I said, we're turning to powder here. So as well as my division was doing, and we were doing well considering it was 2008 and 9 and 10. We were coming out of one of the worst economic situations in my adulthood,
In history, really.
Yeah, I mean it was bad, but we had nowhere to go but up, and we were going up. But I was doing everything. I was doing purchasing and I was literally just trying to keep. I was wearing a lot of hats. Anyways, I contacted this person and he said, Casey, I think would be interested because he's looking to grow and he's a brilliant sales guy. And, Casey's like 15 years younger than me. So at first it was a little different working for somebody who I could almost be their dad, technically I could, I guess. But we've become very close and there's a ton of mutual respect and he treats me real good. But it was shaky. We came there and he had a way of doing things and he was still learning himself. And I had a way of doing things. And like I said, we butted heads in the very beginning, to the point. And I was sort of in a really bad situation because I was at the time, I have full custody of 3 tweens, basically. And I just couldn't just walk out. I had to make sure there was food on the table, roof over their heads, and shirts on their backs. Mm-hmm. So luckily, we worked things out really quick, and it's been all great. It's sincerely since then.
That's
but
great.
In the beginning, it was rough. I'm not going to lie to you.
Well, you sounds like you both went through a process of growing and learning together, and at the same time, you were salvaging something that you worked so hard for, and making that work. So that's really beautiful.
Yeah, it turned out to be really great.
So I know you said you're going to retire there. So what's next? Tell us about the future of Suntsu.
You know what? Business in general was what's crazy in 2020. At the end of 2019, one thing we've with the tools, we're able to really forecast how successful our coming year is going to be. Mm-hmm. And 2020 was slated to be the absolute best year in my career. And in Q1, January, February, March, it was definitely on track. I mean, it was like a phenomenal first quarter. And then by the end of March, COVID kind of reared its ugly head. In April, the floor just dropped. And I'm like, damn, this was going to be the year. And then we got to May and June and things started to this graduate. And by the end of 2020, it was the best year of my career. If you would have asked me in March or April, how do you think you're going to do this year? And I would have said, we're in deep shit. We're in deep trouble. 2021 rolled around, and it was better than 2020. It was phenomenal, and there was a lot of factors that, if you're interested, I could tell you about it was such a great year. 2022 was neck and neck with 2021, which was a phenomenal year. This year, it flattened out. It for me, it went back to pre-COVID levels, which were good, but not phenomenal like they were, in the previous 2 years. Yeah.
So tell me about the factors that made 2020 so good for you.
Well, I deal a lot in the music business, the audio industry. I provide a lot of the components to the manufacturers who make equipment for musicians. A lot of those, a large portion of those are, I don't know if you're a guitar player.
I am a musician. I have a band called Lovolution, and I use a lot of pedals. I use a lot of mixing boards and stuff like that.
All right. So those pedals, chances are you're using quite a few of I deal with the top effect pedal manufacturers in North America and so the switches that you're stomping, those are my switches. Okay. Those potentiometers that you're adjusting, those are my pots. The toggle switches, the jack that you're plugging your guitar into, those are my jacks.
Wow.
So people, I think, were at home buying the hell out of effects pedals. Like people were buying off Amazon, everything they could, they were bored. But that went on for a couple of years, and other sectors too were starting to do better. Traffic, who I deal with, security, gate controls, even the studio electronics, not just the effects pedals, but some of the rack mounted gear, everybody was doing great. And part of the success was almost handed to us because of COVID. There were a lot of major delays in getting the components made and shipped, because overseas, when a factory had a COVID outbreak, they would shut down. They would quarantine until everybody tested negative. And it wasn't just the factories that were making my switches or connectors or pots. They all get their raw material from all these other vendors, whether it's the terminals or the plastics or the this or that. So if one of those factories shut down because of COVID, so there was delays, lead times were going through the roof. It went from what was typically 6 to 8 weeks was going to 16 to 20 weeks. What was normally 16 to 20 was going out, 36 weeks. Some items were going out past a year. So customers were frantic. So they were buying way more than what they needed, because it was a better gamble to go out and buy more than what they need than to not be able to build and ship. So you have them being busier than they've ever been. You have not only the delays on getting the parts from me, but it wasn't just me. It was, whoever else they were dealing with. Then there was freight issues. There was so much stuff coming in that there was a container shortage overseas.
Not to mention the longshoremen who weren't showing up at work either at the ports.
Yep. And in LA Harbor here, the boats were stacked out miles. If you were a giant, I remember flying out of LAX or John Wayne Airport and looking out the window, and you could just see all these ships in LA Harbor going out all the way to Catalina, almost, that if you were a giant, you could walk from ship to ship. So now we're dealing with customers. Things have slowed down a little bit. A lot of it has to do with consumer confidence, and that's one factor. And the other factor is they just have too much. They have too much product that they need to deplete before they need to buy more. Actually, this quarter, we're in Q4 now. We're starting to see this, the tide turning. again. They're getting busier again. They're running out of parts. They're getting busier. Hopefully the things happening in the world won't affect that, and we can start enjoying good business again.
We'll keep our fingers crossed. Actually, what you gave me one little boost of confidence, because one usual precursor to a major recession is a big inventory blowout. What I'm hearing from you is that seems to have not been as big as it sometimes is during some of the recessions, where they just have to shut down production lines for an extended period of time.
Right. Yeah, I'm definitely, the activity is up. There's a lot of new products in design. The inability to get really critical parts, that is for the most part subsided. The biggest headache for most of my customers were the chips, the ICs, which, believe it or not, I don't get into that. The only time we get into the active components, the IC chips, is when they can't find them. We'll go out and we'll locate them, and we'll make sure they're authentic, that they're not counterfeit. We'll make sure they're functional. And we've helped a lot of customers. And that was a very big part of our sales in 2021, 2022, and I think 2020 as well. Not as much today because it's eased up quite a bit. So they're not having the same difficulties getting parts. And all the orders they placed a year and a half ago, all that product came in and they're sitting on it.
Yeah. But meanwhile, that's something that you have in your back pocket if some of the other things slow down a little bit, if it gets tight again, because you are an effective hunter of hard to find stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got a problem, I'm going to find you a solution. I'll dig as deep as I have to until there's nowhere else to go. And, when you've been doing this for as long as I have, even if I can't help a good customer directly through me, if I know who can help them, if I can keep my customers happy and keep them busy, and they're going to continue to need my parts. So I'll say, hey, Joe, this guy can help you out. Give him a call. He can help you out either with design or engineering, or he's got, the twist ties or whatever it is that you need that you can't get. And that goes a long way. I think customers appreciate that. Sometimes I even recommend them to a competitor, so, hey, look, keep the line going. I don't want you to have a line down. And they remember that.
Well, the theme of this podcast is the mutual success. And you just hit on something, another thing that's especially beautiful, that doing the right thing doesn't always mean you're going to make the right amount of money for the effort you're putting into it. So that's a real ethical dilemma that a lot of people face. It's like, I'm not going to make a buck, so you can go scratch. But your approach it really takes the long-term view, and we need more of that in this this economic situation that we're in right now. How about interest rates? Do you find interest rates or the availability of credit is impacting anything you do at all?
No. Customers typically have references, and we check them out. And if they pay their bills, we give them net terms. We don't charge interest rates.
Okay.
Typically we ship the product. They have 30 days to pay us. And if they decide to not communicate and not pay us, we don't ship their product to them. And that's the way it always worked. But no, I mean, interest rates may affect running of the business that I'm just really not too involved with. But I don't think, I mean, I would have heard about it.
Okay. Before we conclude, you mentioned a minute ago, a few minutes ago, that you had some forecasting tools that seemed to be pretty accurate until COVID came along. What tools are you using to kind of get a really good handle on the way, let's say, incoming business is looking?
So it's basically a tool that Casey, the owner, had developed, and it's brilliant. It's I think it's changed names, but it's essentially called a tracker, an opportunity tracker. So what you're doing is you're documenting and loading, as they say, your opportunities. And opportunities are usually when a customer gives you an opportunity, you quote them, you send them a data sheet. They like what they see, they like the price, and they want samples because they need to test the parts before they can add it to the bill of materials, before anybody can buy the parts. So you essentially you qualify the opportunity by figuring out with the customer what their estimated annual usage is on that part, what the cost is, what the resale is. And after a certain period of time, let's say after a year of putting in all these opportunities, you see how many of those opportunities converted into orders. And and after 2-3 years, you pretty much know your percentage of opportunities that convert. And what that allows you to do is, based on your history, when you go into, like right now, we're in Q4, so I'll have a pretty good idea. It's a little harder right now because, again, the tide it was very low this year and it's just starting to rise. But you have a pretty good idea if you've really communicated with your customer on when that project's supposed to go into production. Are you on a new design, or are you on an existing design where they're second sourcing your product in? And how soon will they switch to your brand? All this information is really important. And then that basically will give you a really good idea of, based on your existing business or opportunities, what your sales are going to look like the following year. What it doesn't include, what new business you will develop in this new year. But you can also use your past history on, what do you typically, how because there's erosion. Some of that business goes away. Some of the products go into life, the customer's products, or you may lose some of that business for whatever reason. I mean, not everybody is going to buy from you 100% of the time, 100% of their lifetime. So that's basically.
But it sounds like you take a lot of time to really get to know how the customer is going to use your product, how they're going to start up the manufacturing process and then prove it out, and basically getting to know more about their business, the technical and economic aspects of it, also helps you. It helps them, of course, because now you understand better how to treat them and supply them. But also helps you because you get a better handle on where your business is going to be. Excellent.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. I mean, it's something that is pretty basic, but I never even thought of anything like this until I came over to the Suntsu, to be honest with you.
It's come a long way from the old boys club, but it's naturally something that's going to deepen relationships. On the face of it, it's pretty clear how it does that.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we've gone over a lot of stuff, and we've talked about some ways that you expand the effectiveness and efficiency of, let's just call it what it is, American technology, and it's pretty impressive. So I salute you. Keep up the good work, and thanks for being on the Mutual Success Podcast.
I enjoyed it.
Me too.